The microphone screamed, one thin, metallic shriek that rattled my teeth, then settled into a low, breathing hum. I held still in the back row as if the sound had pinned me there. The civic hall smelled like lemon wax and old paper, like someone had tried to polish history until it shone. Overhead lights washed the room in a hard municipal brightness, bleaching faces into the same pale seriousness. The applause came in waves, hands striking hands, polite and practiced, then ebbed to a hush that felt heavier than noise. On stage, the city seal hung behind the lectern like an oath no one had to swear out loud anymore. Harold Bennett stepped up as if he belonged to the wood, the microphone, the banner, the very air. He was older than the man in my earliest memories, but he had kept the same posture. Shoulders squared, chin lifted, the careful stillness of someone who knew cameras loved calm. His suit fit like a uniform. A small flag pin caught the light with every turn of his lapel. When he placed both hands on the edges of the podium, his fingers spread in a gesture that said ownership without announcing it. The presenter, Mayor Kellerman, teeth too white under the stage lights, beamed and read from a card. "Tonight," the mayor said, "we honor a citizen whose integrity shaped our community, a public servant, a leader, a man who always did the right thing when it mattered most." The phrase, "always did the right thing," landed like a gavel strike. I kept my hands folded in my lap. My nails pressed half moons into my palms through the fabric of my gloves. I hadn't worn gloves in years, not like this. Not unless there was a reason to keep my hands from shaking. A spotlight narrowed onto my father's face, making his eyes look brighter than they were. He accepted the plaque with the easy smile he'd used my whole life. Warm, humble, almost shy. The room rewarded him immediately with more applause. The clapping sounded wrong from where I sat. From the back row, it wasn't celebration. It was machinery. I had chosen the last row on purpose. It gave me the exit door on my left, paint chip near the push bar, hinges recently oiled so it closed with a soft, obedient sigh. It gave me the full room in front of me, the crowd of neighbors who had watched me grow up without ever knowing they'd watched. I'd worn a dark coat over plain clothes, hair pinned tight, face neutral. No ribbons, no name tag, nothing that made me a story. I wasn't here to be seen. I was here because I couldn't pretend I hadn't heard the invitation the city sent out. Citizen of the Year, Harold Bennett, a Knight of Honor. I still had the program in my hands. It was printed on thick cardstock, glossy enough to reflect the overhead lights. On the front, my father's photo, his grin modest, his eyes steady. Beneath it, a slogan in looping script, "Honor above all." My throat tightened. Above all. I had heard that phrase before, whispered behind kitchen doors, passed across dinner tables like salt. It had sounded noble when I was young. It had sounded like the kind of thing that kept families intact. Now it sounded like a lock. A woman 2 seats away dabbed her eyes with a tissue. The tissue was scented, lavender, and it floated into the air when she breathed out, mixing with the wax and paper smell until the whole hall felt like a museum display labeled, "Good People." Someone in the middle rows turned their head, scanning the back as if looking for a latecomer. Their gaze slid over me without catching. I blended in, just another quiet attendee. On stage, the mayor leaned toward the microphone. "Mr. Bennett," he said, "would you say a few words?" My father's laugh came out soft and controlled, barely a sound, but the room leaned toward it anyway. He adjusted the microphone with 2 fingers. The device squeaked in protest, then steadied. His touch was light, practiced. He waited for the hall to settle into attentive silence before he spoke, like a man who believed silence belonged to him. "My family always put honor above all." 7 words, clean, perfect. The audience responded with approving murmurs, the small sounds people made when they wanted to be included in virtue. A few nodded as if he'd spoken scripture. The woman with the lavender tissue smiled through tears. I stared at the podium microphone. The black foam at its head looked like a bruise. A memory tried to rise. Kitchen light, a glass set down too hard. My father's voice saying, "Just be quiet." But I pushed it away. Not yet. Not here. Not in this part of the night. My father continued, voice warmed by the room's devotion. "I stand here humbled," he said, "because this honor, this recognition, it isn't mine alone." He paused, letting the sentence hang like a banner. His eyes moved across the crowd. He had always been good at that, making people feel personally chosen by his attention. "It belongs," he went on, "to every neighbor who believed in what we could be." A small laugh rose from the front row. A man in a blazer elbowed his wife, pleased, like he'd been named in the speech. My father's hands stayed planted on the podium edges. His knuckles remained pale under the stage lights. He looked steady. He looked like certainty. I felt the folder in my bag press against my thigh. It was a thin municipal file, sealed inside a manila envelope, creased at the corners, stamped, and now finally marked with a word that had weight in my world. Declassified. The stamp wasn't dramatic, just ink, just letters. But the envelope might as well have been a flare. I shifted slightly, crossing one ankle over the other, and the folder's edge dug into me through the bag's leather. The physical discomfort steadied my breathing. I held on to the ache as if it could anchor me. On stage, my father lowered his voice. He did it like a trick, softening until people leaned in, willing to meet him halfway. "Years ago," he said, "our town faced a moment that could have broken us." A ripple of interest moved through the hall. People straightened, heads tilted. Even the mayor's smile changed, less ceremonial now, more hungry. I watched the crowd react, and it hit me how much they loved a crisis when it arrived already solved. My father's gaze lifted slightly, as if he was looking over the room and into the past. "We didn't have much," he said. "We had pressure. We had fear. We had voices telling us to choose the easy thing." The word voices made my back go cold. Then he smiled again, small, reassuring. "But we chose honor." Applause broke out, quick, almost automatic. A few people laughed in admiration, like they'd heard a punchline. The sound rolled toward the ceiling and came back down thinner, as if even the hall couldn't fully believe it. I did not clap. I kept my hands folded. My fingers rested over the knuckles, white skin over white bone, and I stared at the stage as if I were watching a stranger accept praise meant for someone else. Because in a way, I was. He had always been careful to keep certain details private. Not hidden, never hidden. He didn't treat truth like a crime scene, he treated it like property. He decided who got access. A man behind me cleared his throat. The sound scraped. Someone near the aisle whispered, "That's our herald," with the proud softness usually reserved for family. I wanted to turn and look at them. I wanted to tell them I was family too, more than the phrase "our herald" could ever contain. But the rules had been set long before tonight. I stayed quiet. On stage, the mayor leaned in as if drawn by gravity. "You've always been a moral compass for us," he said, voice amplified by the microphone. "You taught this city what leadership looks like." My father dipped his head in a polite refusal of the compliment. It made the audience like him more. He continued, "I learned honor at home." Home. That word carried a smell with it. Fried onions, dish soap, the faint sourness of anxiety under everything. I felt it in the back of my tongue like a ghost. He lifted one hand from the podium and pressed it lightly to his chest. The gesture was simple, almost tender. "My father," he said, "taught me that a man's name is his legacy." A soft, collective sound of agreement moved through the room. People liked legacy. It was clean. It didn't demand specifics. He went on, "And my children." He paused, and my heartbeat stumbled. "My children taught me that honor isn't what you claim." The hall held its breath. "It's what you protect." Mini-turn. I felt my shoulders tense. Not because he'd said the word children, because he'd used it as a shield. I had protected him for years. I had protected his name from the truth the way a medic protected a wound from infection, covering it, cleaning around it, telling myself it would heal if I didn't touch it too much. The applause that followed came slower, more reverent. Even from the back row, I could see people exchange looks like they'd just witnessed something profound. My father's eyes drifted again, and for a fraction of a second, they skimmed the back of the hall. They passed over me. He didn't recognize me. Or he did and chose not to. Either option landed the same. I was not part of the story he was telling. The presenter had mentioned his sacrifices. The printed program listed his years of service. Someone had compiled his life into a timeline of civic virtues. There was no line for the night he'd asked his daughter to carry something ugly so he could stay clean. There was no line for my silence. A young volunteer in a blue sash moved down the aisle with a tray of bottled water. The plastic crinkled in her hand. She stopped near me, smiled politely, and offered a bottle. "No, thank you," I said. My voice came out steady, too steady. The volunteer nodded and moved on, her shoes making soft rubber squeaks against the polished floor. I watched her go, and the exit door on my left seemed brighter than the rest of the wall, as if lit from behind. A simple rectangle of escape. I stayed. On stage, my father's tone shifted, lighter now, confident. He was building toward his favorite thing, the moment where he sounded humble while taking full possession of the room. "When I was a young official," he said, "I faced a decision that kept me up at night." A hush. The audience loved a confession as long as it ended in redemption. "My advisors told me to do what was popular," he continued. "But popularity isn't leadership." The mayor nodded, solemn. A reporter in the front row adjusted their camera, lens clicking faintly, like an insect, always hungry. "I made the hard choice," my father said, "because I believed a community is only as strong as its standards." Standards. I tasted metal in my mouth, like I had bitten my tongue. I remembered a different standard: Army doctrine, conflict resolution, the discipline of not escalating, the oath that meant something because it was heavy. My whole career had been built around listening to voices people tried to bury. And here he was, speaking about voices like he'd invented them. The program in my hands bent slightly under my grip. The glossy paper creased with a quiet crack. My father leaned closer to the microphone. The sound system caught his breath, amplified it, turned his control into intimacy. "I want to say," he said, "that I am proud, deeply proud of the example my family set." The word example carried a sharp edge. An example was something you displayed, something you used. He smiled at the audience again, and the hall smiled back. "Because when the moment came," he said, "we did what was right." Mini turn. A man in the second row stood and clapped before anyone else. Others followed, eager not to be the last to applaud. The applause grew, filling the room, washing over me like a tide. It wasn't joy. It was agreement. I sat in it without moving. The sound hit my ribs and kept going. It vibrated the wooden seat beneath me. It made the air feel thick, almost humid, as if the room had exhaled all at once. My father waited for the applause to crest, then lifted his hand gently as if calming a choir. The clapping softened and stopped, obedient. He looked pleased, not smug, but assured, like a man watching his own story obey him. He continued, "I know tonight isn't about the past, it's about the future." Another safe line, another applause-ready idea. But then he added, "It's about what we teach our children." My stomach tightened. I felt the envelope in my bag again, as if it had shifted on its own, as if it was impatient. Under the stage lights, my father's face held the glow of honor the city had handed him. He looked almost holy, in the way public praise can make a person look. A man made of speeches, a man made of absence. And I realized what hurt most wasn't that he'd taken credit. It was that he'd made my silence sound like virtue. He was building his hero image on the quiet space where my truth should have been. The microphone hummed softly, constant as a pulse. My father's voice filled the room, smooth and warm. And from the back row, unseen, unnamed, and still, I watched him tell my story like it belonged to him. I realized he was telling my story but without me in it. The applause from the civic hall had followed me into memory like a stubborn echo. In my mind, the clapping became a different sound. Paper sliding across a desk, the dry whisper of a file being opened, the faint grind of a lock turning. The smell shifted too. Lemon wax and perfume dissolving into burnt office coffee, copier toner, and the sour edge of anxiety you couldn't name when you were young. I had been 22 when I first touched the Ruiz file. I wasn't a soldier yet. I was still the daughter who believed love meant compliance if you said it politely enough. I still thought my father's confidence was proof that he was right. And I still wanted, quietly, embarrassingly, to be chosen by him. His office at City Hall had been smaller than people imagined. The walls were lined with framed photos of ribbon cuttings and handshake moments. My father beside the mayor, my father beside a governor, my father beside a high school marching band. Every image had the same lighting, bright, public, cleansing. The desk lamp, by contrast, cast a private yellow pool over whatever was in front of him, like the truth only existed in that circle. That afternoon, he had asked me to help organize some paperwork. He said it like it was a favor to me. "Learn how the town works," he'd told me, smiling, already wearing his campaign face even in an empty office. The file cabinet in the corner had been metal and overstuffed, the drawers stubborn. When I pulled one open, it screeched softly, an ugly sound the building swallowed. My fingertips came away faintly gray from the handle, like the cabinet marked anyone who touched it. I found the folder because my father had left it too close to the front. Ruiz Property, Safety Review. It was typed, not handwritten, official enough to seem harmless. I opened it because I didn't know the cost of looking. The first page used careful language: evaluation, concern, recommendation. The second page was firmer: immediate action advised. I felt a small tightening behind my ribs, the instinct you get when two stories on paper don't match. Then I saw the inspection note, a different name, a different conclusion. Repairs recommended, no imminent danger. I read it twice. The words stayed the same. Underneath, clipped to the page, was a black and white photo of a small house with peeling paint and a porch that leaned slightly, not from collapse, but from age. A child's bicycle lay on its side in the yard. I could almost hear the chain clicking, could almost smell sun-warmed dirt. It didn't look like an emergency. It looked like a life that needed time. I turned the page and met my father's memo. It wasn't long. It didn't need to be. Proceed immediately. Override objections. His signature sat beneath it, confident ink, a flourish at the end like a politician's smile. My throat tightened so fast I tasted metal. The office door clicked behind me. I didn't have to turn to know it was him. The air changed when my father entered a room. He carried authority the way some men carried cologne. Too much, but familiar. He crossed behind me. I felt his presence at my shoulder, close enough that his breath warmed the air near my ear. He didn't touch me yet. "What are you doing?" he asked. His voice stayed low, not angry, controlled. I turned, folder still open in my hands. The pages trembled once, a tiny betrayal. "You said organize," I replied. His eyes dropped to the header. The smallest shift happened in his expression, something tightening, something recalculating. Then he placed a hand on the folder and closed it gently, like tucking a child into bed. "That one isn't for you," he said. "It says the house wasn't unsafe," I said.
My voice sounded thin in the office, swallowed by carpet and filing cabinets. It says repairs. He exhaled through his nose, an almost patient sound. You're reading fragments. Then show me the whole, I said.
He took the folder from my hands and walked it to his desk. The paper made a dry whisper as he set it down. He pulled the desk lamp closer, like he needed better light to justify himself. Claire, he said, and he used my name the way he used the word family, as leverage. He tapped the memo with one finger. That neighborhood was a problem, he said. Complaints, codes ignored, people scared. A family lived there, I said. His jaw flexed once. He didn't like being reminded of faces. They were offered help, he said. Were they? My voice rose slightly, then I forced it back down. Even then, I had the instinct not to escalate him. Not because I was wise, because I was trained by living with his mood like weather. He leaned forward, elbows on the desk, eyes on me as if he could push me back into obedience with a look. Leadership isn't pretty, he said. It's necessary. I stared at his signature. I stared at the word override. It wasn't an emergency, I said. He didn't answer the point. He changed the frame. Do you think I wanted this? He asked. It was a trap, the kind of question that demanded comfort as payment for clarity. I swallowed. I think you signed it. His eyes narrowed slightly, then softened. He switched tactics without announcing it, as if persuasion was a reflex. You're smart, he said. You understand duty. I hated that compliment because it felt like being put in a uniform before I had earned it. He continued, quieter now. Sometimes you choose the lesser harm. I looked at the folder again, closed now, hiding the bicycle photo like a secret. How is displacing a family lesser? I asked. My father's tone sharpened just a fraction. It protected the town. Protected. The word sounded noble until you asked who it protected and from what. The room felt warmer. The lamp's yellow light seemed to thicken the air, like it wanted to keep us inside the circle of private justification. Then he said the line that became my inheritance. Just be quiet, he said. For family. 8 words. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten me out loud. He didn't have to. The building itself felt like it leaned in, waiting to see if I would comply. I stood there, 22, still hungry for my father's approval like it was oxygen. I imagined the town turning against him, imagined my mother's face collapsing, imagined the way our last name would sound if people spat it. And I realized, with a cold clarity that made my hands go numb, that my father had handed me a choice disguised as love. Carry this, or watch us fall. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I simply went still. He watched my silence settle. He mistook it for agreement. Good, he said, and the relief in his voice was real. Relief not that he'd done the right thing, but that I would help him keep the story clean. That's my girl. Mini turn. He opened the bottom drawer, slid the folder inside, and turned the key. The lock clicked, small, final, almost gentle. The sound echoed in my chest like a door closing on my own voice. I left the office that day with a polite smile on my face because I didn't know how to leave with anything else. Outside City Hall, the air smelled like car exhaust and cut grass. The flag over the building snapped softly in the wind, a clean sound that made everything feel official. I stood on the steps and looked back at the windows, imagining the locked drawer like a dark tooth inside the building. That night at home, my mother asked how my day had been. Fine, I said. The lie was small, but it tasted like something that would grow. A week later, my father invited me to a campaign dinner. He said it would be good experience. He said it with the same easy tone he used when he wanted to fold me into his image. In the banquet hall, the air smelled like roasted chicken and cheap champagne. My father moved from table to table, shaking hands, laughing, making people feel like he had time for them. He introduced me as my Claire, then watched their eyes flick to me with admiration. Daughter of a man who cared. Nobody asked what I'd seen in his office. Nobody asked about Ruiz. I stood behind him in a dress I didn't like and practiced smiling. Every time someone praised his integrity, my cheeks tightened, and I learned a new skill: how to keep my face calm while my stomach turned. At the end of the night, when we were alone in the car, he reached over and squeezed my shoulder. "You did great," he said. I stared out the window at the dark streets. "I didn't do anything." "You supported me," he said, as if support was the same as love. I didn't answer. The road noise filled the space for me. A month after that, I signed my enlistment papers. People in town told my father how proud they were. They told him he'd raised a patriot. They told him his family embodied values. My father received their praise like payment. The day I left for basic, he hugged me in the driveway. His embrace was firm, possessive, long enough for the neighbors to see. In my ear, he whispered, "Make us proud." I nodded, not because I believed it, because I didn't know how to refuse him yet. Basic training scraped the softness out of me. The air smelled like sweat and disinfectant. The sound of boots on gravel became a language I understood better than family dinners. In the barracks at night, when the lights went out, I lay awake listening to other women breathe, and I thought about that locked drawer. I told myself I had made a sacrifice. I told myself my silence protected something. But the more I learned about duty, real duty, the kind that cost you sleep and comfort, the more my father's version of duty looked like convenience dressed in moral language. When I commissioned, I chose civil affairs because it put me close to the fracture lines. I wanted to be where words mattered, where truth could stop violence before it started. I spent years in places where a rumor could ignite a village, where a lie could turn a crowd into a weapon, where the right sentence, spoken at the right moment, could keep children alive. And still, back home, my father's career kept rising. He became the man the town pointed to when they needed proof they were good. He appeared in newspapers beside charity checks. He stood at podiums beside flags. He told stories about hard choices and sleepless nights. He made leadership sound like sainthood. Sometimes when I was deployed, my mother sent clippings. Harold Bennett leads with integrity. Bennett, honor above all. I would hold the newspaper in a tent that smelled like dust and fuel, listening to distant engines and feel my face go blank. Not anger, yet. Something colder. The understanding that my silence wasn't a one-time favor. It was a foundation he had built on. Mini-turn. One winter, I came home on leave. The town had decorated Main Street with lights, white bulbs strung like frost. The air smelled like pine from the Christmas lot. I walked into a diner and heard someone at the counter say, "Bennett's the only honest one left." I froze with my hand on the door, the bell over it chiming softly. Honest. The word felt like a bruise being pressed. I sat in a booth where I could see the window and the exit. Old habits never died, they just changed uniforms. A waitress recognized me and smiled. "You're Harold's girl," she said. I corrected her automatically. "I'm Claire." She laughed. Yeah. We're proud of you." Proud of me. Proud of him. Proud of a story that had room for everyone except the truth. That night at my parents' house, my father poured whiskey into 2 glasses. The amber smelled sharp, medicinal. He handed me one like he was offering adulthood. He talked about town politics, about budgets and zoning, about hard calls. His voice was smooth. He loved the sound of himself in a room. At one point he said, "People need heroes." I looked at the whiskey in my glass. I didn't drink it. "People need repair," I replied. He frowned slightly as if I'd spoken a foreign language. He set his glass down with a soft click. "You're too idealistic," he said. I met his gaze. "I'm trained to see consequences." His mouth tightened. Then he softened again, always the shift. "You're my daughter," he said, as if that ended arguments. I felt the old pressure rise, family as a wall closing in. I kept my voice controlled. "Don't use that." His eyes narrowed. "Use what?" "My silence," I said. He didn't deny it. He didn't apologize. He took a sip of whiskey and let the burn make him brave. "You're dramatic," he said. 8 words would have been his limit if he'd been careful, but he still kept it short, still cutting. I stared at him across the kitchen table, the same table where he'd once asked me to pass the salt and then asked me to bury a truth. The overhead light buzzed faintly, an insect sound that made the room feel smaller. "I'm factual," I replied. He leaned back, studying me, deciding which version of father to wear. Then he said quietly, "We don't reopen that." We. As if the decision belonged to both of us. As if my life had been an equal vote. I stood up and took my glass to the sink. The smell of dish soap rose as I turned on the water. The faucet hissed. The whiskey swirled down the drain like wasted warmth. My father watched me, face unreadable. I didn't argue. I didn't explode. I didn't give him drama to dismiss. I simply stopped participating in his comfort. The next morning, before I left, I went to my old room and opened the drawer where I kept childhood keepsakes. Letters, photos, a folded flag from a school ceremony. At the bottom, beneath everything, I had hidden a copy of the short memo I'd written years ago, my objection, filed quietly with the ethics office and ignored. My younger handwriting looked too neat, too hopeful. I read the first line again. "I object to this action as unjustified." It didn't change the past. It didn't return the Ruiz home. But it proved something that mattered for my own survival. Even then, I had tried to speak. I hadn't been silent because I believed him. I had been silent because I was afraid of what truth would do to the people I loved. I folded the paper carefully and put it back. Not because I was surrendering, because I was waiting for a moment when speaking would matter more than protecting the illusion. Years passed. Deployments, promotions, briefings where I taught commanders the difference between stability and silence. I learned to read a room the way my father read a crowd, but for different reasons. He wanted approval. I wanted outcomes that didn't rot later. And still, at home, my father's reputation stayed intact. Until the record changed status. Until the file that had been locked became public. Until the town scheduled a ceremony to honor the hero story built on my restraint. That was why I sat in the back row of the civic hall with a folder pressing against my thigh, like a quiet weapon made of paper. Not because I wanted revenge, because I wanted the truth to stand in the light without needing me to shout. As my father spoke on stage, I remembered the lock clicking, and my phone buzzed in my pocket like a key turning back. My phone vibrated in my coat pocket like a warning I'd trained myself to ignore. In the civic hall, the air had gone warm from bodies and stage lights. Lemon wax and perfume mixed into something too sweet, like a room trying to convince itself it was clean. On stage, my father leaned into the microphone with the ease of a man who'd never had to pay for the story he told. "Years ago," he said, "we faced a moment that could have shattered us." The microphone carried his voice perfectly, rounded, confident, intimate. It made him sound like the truth had chosen him as its narrator. I kept my gaze on the podium's edge, on the black foam head of the mic, on the way the cable dropped down the wood like a vein. I had spent my life listening for pressure changes in a room, the breath before anger, the pause before confession, the shift of weight before someone ran. The crowd leaned forward in synchronized attention. My father's hands rested on the podium, fingers spread. His medal ribbon sat flat against his chest, colors tidy and bright. Under the stage lights, it looked like proof. he continued. We had experts, we had advisors. He let the words settle, then said, but we also had fear. I felt my phone buzz again. One long vibration, then a stop. It was the same rhythm as a door latch catching. He smiled, softening the room. We made the hard call anyway. Applause threatened to rise, but he lifted one hand, calm, guiding. The clapping died before it fully began. He liked control more than noise. Then he said the sentence that made my spine tighten under my coat. That decision saved our community. Saved. There it was again, the same word, the same varnish over the same rot. I heard the old file drawer lock in my mind. I saw the bicycle in that grainy photo. I remembered the way my father's signature looked. Confident, final, unbothered by consequence. Saved, he said. I stared at his mouth and felt the clean fury of recognition. He wasn't just lying. He was sanctifying the lie, turning it into a lesson, a legacy, a civic myth. My phone vibrated a third time. I didn't pull it out immediately. I let it sit there, pressing against my thigh, as if I could postpone the moment by refusing to look. In conflict zones, I had learned that messages could change a mission with one line of text. This felt like that, except the mission was my own life. On stage, my father went on, voice careful. I don't share this for praise, he said. I share it for the next generation. The crowd murmured like congregants. I finally slid my phone out of my pocket, keeping it low so the glow wouldn't catch attention. My screen lit my hands in pale blue. The message was from an address I hadn't saved under a name, because names created trails. Records release confirmed. Ruiz file declassified at 2:07 p.m. Below it, an attachment icon. A stamp I recognized without opening anything. I held my breath. The screen's light felt indecent against the dark row of seats. I lowered the brightness and tucked my thumb over the attachment as if it could bite. A mini-turn arrived. Not outside me, but inside. The old agreement I'd made at 22 cracked audibly in my thoughts. Just be quiet. For family. Back then, silence had been a bargain. Tonight, silence was becoming a stage. I didn't open the attachment yet. I listened instead. My father shifted into the portion of a speech where he always sounded most sincere, where he spoke about burden, about choosing right over easy. His voice slowed. He paused on key words. He let the microphone amplify not just his speech, but his restraint. Honor, he said, isn't a medal. A soft chuckle from the front row. People liked humility. It's what you do, he continued, when no one is watching. That line drew appreciative murmurs. The mayor nodded, satisfied. I stared at the microphone. Because the problem was this. Someone had been watching. I had. And the record had. I remembered the ethics memo I'd written years ago. Quietly filed, quietly ignored. I had been young enough to believe institutions corrected themselves when you used the proper channel. I had learned the real lesson later. Institutions corrected themselves only when light reached the right people at the right time. That was why declassification mattered. It wasn't vengeance. It was sunlight. My father leaned closer, his voice dropping again. I never wanted to hurt anyone, he said. The lie wasn't in the sentence. It was in the implication. That harm was something that happened accidentally, like bad weather. I felt the folder in my bag, paper pressed flat, sealed. I could feel the edges through the leather as if the document wanted out. My phone buzzed once more, short and sharp. Another message. Reporter present. They requested packet. My stomach tightened. So it had started. Not because I had posted anything. Not because I had contacted the press. The file had moved through the system the way truth sometimes did. Slowly, bureaucratically. Then suddenly, everywhere. On stage, my father's tone warmed with confidence. He was entering the safe zone of his speech, where the crowd's admiration became a cushion. We rebuilt trust, he said. We rebuilt pride. pride. Another word he used like a flag. The program in my lap listed his decision under pressure as a highlight of his leadership. It didn't name the Ruiz family. It didn't mention displacement. It didn't mention the inspector's note that contradicted his directive. The myth had been printed. The truth tonight had been released. I slid my phone back into my pocket and made a decision that felt like the opposite of a plan. I would not interfere. I would not rush the stage. I would not chase the reporter down the aisle. I would not do the thing people expected from someone wronged. Explode, accuse, perform. I would stay seated and let the record speak when it was ready. That was my discipline. It was also my protection. Because the moment I opened my mouth, it would become my story again. Me against him, daughter against father, private grievance paraded as spectacle. My father would know how to handle that. He was built for it. He could turn a personal accusation into proof of my emotion, my confusion, my misunderstanding of context. But paper was harder to gaslight. A file didn't raise its voice. It didn't shake. It didn't cry. It simply existed. And existence was the one thing my father couldn't outspeak forever. On stage, he smiled and glanced toward the mayor, then back to the audience. "I want to thank everyone who stood with me," he said. The word "stood" landed oddly, because it reminded me of a different standing. The way soldiers stood when something mattered, when a flag passed, when a coffin arrived. Standing in those moments wasn't celebration, it was respect. This standing was something else. It was agreement without scrutiny. I watched the front rows, polished hair, pressed jackets, civic pride on display. People leaned into the glow of being part of a good town. Their faces had the softness of those who had never been asked to pay for their beliefs. Then I saw someone near the aisle, a woman with a press badge clipped to her blazer, camera strap across her shoulder. She wasn't filming continuously. She wasn't waving for attention. She was waiting. Patient. Professional. A folder was tucked under her arm, thin, black, controlled. My father didn't notice her yet. Or he did and dismissed her as harmless, part of the evening's coverage. I knew better. I had sat in too many meetings where one prepared person changed the tone of a room by placing the right document on the table. The reporter's presence made my skin go cold beneath my coat. My father continued, "If I've learned anything, it's that integrity is—" He paused, searching for the right word to end on. He chose one that sounded like a blessing. Contagious. A few people laughed softly. Others nodded. I remembered another contagion. How silence spread in families. How it moved like fog, filling every space you didn't insist on lighting. I adjusted slightly in my chair, shifting the weight of my bag. The envelope inside made a soft, papery sigh. It felt like it was breathing with me. A mini-turn rippled through the hall. A staff member moved to the side of the stage and set up a second microphone stand near the aisle, an obvious signal that the speech would transition to audience questions. The metal stand clinked when it locked into place. Q&A. That was where stories met resistance. My father spoke his closing lines with practiced uplift. "Thank you," he said. "May we all choose honor when it counts." Applause erupted, bigger now, unrestrained. The room stood, chairs scraping, a tide of approval rising. I stayed seated, not out of disrespect for the ceremony, out of respect for truth. The standing crowd partially blocked my view of the stage, turning everyone into a wall of backs and shoulders. I watched the back of a man's suit jacket wrinkle as he clapped. I watched a woman's earrings sway with each nod. The sound was loud, but underneath it I heard something else. A thin hum through the speakers, the microphone still alive, still waiting. My father stepped back from the podium as if to receive the applause like rain. He looked pleased. Then the mayor raised a hand and spoke into the mic. "We'll take a few questions for Mr. Bennett." The applause thinned, then stopped. People sat back down, chairs scraping again. The hall settled into expectation. My father returned to the microphone. The metal ribbon on his chest rose and fell with his breathing. Someone in the front row asked a soft question about public service. My father answered with a humble anecdote. His tone was warm. People laughed at the right places. Applause followed. Another question. How do we teach values to our kids? He answered with a neat line about example. More applause. Each exchange reinforced the myth. I watched him do it, how he turned every question into confirmation, how he used the microphone like a tool for shaping what the room believed. Then a man stood up 3 rows from the front. He was older, shoulders slightly rounded, his hands gripping the back of the chair in front of him as if he needed to hold on. He didn't smile. He didn't look like he wanted attention. He looked like he had carried something for a long time. The staff member handed him the aisle microphone. The man's fingers wrapped around it carefully, almost reverently, like he understood the weight of a captured voice. He cleared his throat. The sound came out rough. "Do you remember the Ruiz family?" he asked. The hall shifted. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was a collective tightening, the way a room changes when the safe script is threatened. My father's smile paused for a fraction of a second, just enough. Then he gave the controlled politician laugh, the one designed to make discomfort seem unreasonable. "I remember many families," he said. 8 words. Clean. Evasive. The older man's grip tightened. "You remembered that one," he said, voice still low. My father's hands returned to the podium edge. The wood creaked faintly under his fingers. "We addressed a safety concern," my father replied. I felt my pulse steady into something calm and hard. Because that answer wasn't for the man. It was for the audience. It was my father trying to keep the myth intact by making the truth sound like a nuisance. The reporter near the aisle lifted her black folder slightly, as if preparing. She didn't interrupt. She waited. My phone buzzed again, one short vibration. I didn't need to look. I knew what it meant. The record was moving closer. The older man said, "They lost their home." My father's jaw tightened. His voice stayed even. "It was necessary," he said. 2 words. Cold. The room held its breath. I expected someone to cough, to laugh nervously, to break the tension with a comforting sound. No one did. Because something had shifted. The hall had finally heard a name that didn't belong in a hero story. Ruiz. It didn't fit on a plaque. It didn't fit in applause. It fit in records. My father leaned toward the mic, trying to regain the frame. "Tonight is about—" He stopped. His gaze had flicked toward the reporter. He had noticed the folder. The reporter stepped forward, not rushing, not theatrical. Her shoes tapped lightly on the polished floor. That simple sound, tap, tap, felt louder than applause ever had. She raised her hand slightly. "Mr. Bennett," she said, voice even. "May I ask a question?" My father's smile returned, strained at the corners. "Of course," he said. The mayor looked uncertain, then nodded. The reporter held up the folder, not high, just visible. "These documents were released today," she said. "They concern the Ruiz condemnation." My father's eyes narrowed, just slightly. He said, "We've covered that." The reporter didn't argue. She didn't accuse. She opened the folder. Paper slid against paper with a dry whisper, the sound of a truth waking up. I stayed seated. I stayed quiet. Because this was the point of no return, not because I spoke, but because the record had arrived in the room my father thought belonged to him. And the microphone was still on. The reporter turned one page, and the paper's snap sounded like a lock breaking. The black folder opened like a quiet mouth. Paper slid against paper with that dry, official whisper. Nothing dramatic, nothing cinematic, yet the sound traveled farther than applause ever had. It cut through the civic hall's warm air and made the room feel suddenly colder, as if the building had remembered what it was built for: records, not reverence. My father's smile held for one extra beat, not because he was brave, because he was trained. He looked at the reporter the way he looked at any problem he couldn't bully, measuring its edges, searching for the lever that would move it without leaving fingerprints. "Those documents," he said into the microphone, voice still smooth, "lack context." 4 words that sounded harmless. 4 words that could bury a family. The reporter didn't raise her voice. She didn't accuse him. She simply kept the folder open, pages aligned, eyes steady. Her restraint did what anger couldn't. It refused him the chance to make this about tone instead of truth. The older man with the aisle microphone remained standing. He didn't wave his hand. He didn't plead. He said, "You signed it." My father's jaw tightened. The podium microphone caught a faint breath through his nose, amplified into a small betrayal. "I served this town," my father replied. A lie could be built from true bricks. That was his gift. The mayor shifted beside him, hands clasped, smile uncertain now. Civic ceremonies depended on predictable stories, and unpredictability made officials look weak. The reporter lifted one sheet slightly, just enough for the first rows to see the red stamp at the top. Declassified. Even from the back row, I could picture the ink. I had seen it on my phone screen. I had felt it in the sealed envelope in my bag. A status change. A door opened. A truth permitted. A few heads turned toward the reporter's hands. I heard the soft rustle of suits and dresses as people adjusted, trying to see without admitting they wanted to see. My father leaned forward, voice gentle now, almost parental. "Let's not turn tonight into," he began. He stopped, because he didn't want to say the word trial. He didn't want to imply he deserved one. The reporter spoke again, calm as procedure. "Mr. Bennett," she said, "would you like to respond to the documents now, on record?" On record. The phrase mattered. It dragged the moment out of social air and into institutional gravity. My father's smile narrowed. "There's nothing to respond to," he said. 6 words. Clean, dismissive. Mini-turn. The crowd didn't laugh with him. That absence was small but decisive, like a chair not scraping when it should have, like a door not opening when you expect it. The room was starting to choose attention over comfort. The older man lowered the aisle microphone slightly, as if the weight of it had become too honest. His voice stayed low. "My neighbor slept in a car," he said. 3 months. A woman near the front row sucked in a breath, quick and involuntary. She covered it with a cough, but the cough sounded fake, like a curtain pulled too late. My father's gaze flicked across the audience. He was looking for the faces that would save him. Supporters, friends, people invested in the myth. He found them. He always did. He turned his voice toward them, back into the microphone's warm range. "We're here to honor service," he said, "not revisit old wounds." 8 words. Surgical. And still a weapon. Old wounds. He had named harm without admitting his hand caused it. I felt the impulse to stand rise in my legs like heat. A simple motion. A simple refusal to be erased. But I stayed seated, spine straight, hands still. I let my discipline hold me in place. This wasn't my confrontation. Not yet. Not like that. The mayor cleared his throat and leaned toward his own microphone. The speakers caught a brief squeal that made a few people flinch again. Then he forced a smile. "Let's keep this respectful," he said. Respectful meant manageable. The reporter nodded once, as if agreeing with a rule she already followed. Then she did something smarter than arguing. She turned slightly toward the mayor, not my father. "Mayor Kellerman," she said, "these are public records released today. May the clerk read the relevant excerpt into the record?" The phrase "into the record" hit the room differently than any accusation. It didn't ask for permission to shame. It asked for permission to document. My father's eyes sharpened. "That's unnecessary," he said. 2 words, and the microphone made them sound bigger than they were. The mayor hesitated. His fingers tightened around the microphone stand. I watched him calculate. The ceremony's dignity versus a reporter's right to ask. Public optics versus private loyalty. Behind him, the city clerk sat at a side table. Glasses, neat bun, posture trained for invisibility. Clerks existed to make other people's authority possible. Their power was quiet, but real. They carried the paper. The older man sat down slowly, the aisle microphone handed back to the staff member. He didn't look triumphant. He looked exhausted, like he'd finally set down a weight and was waiting to see if anyone else would pick it up. My father tried to reframe again, voice soft, almost kind. "Ma'am," he said to the reporter, "you're chasing a headline." 5 words. A dismissal shaped like concern. The reporter didn't react. She stayed steady because she understood a simple truth. Only fragile stories feared paper. She repeated, "May the clerk read it?" No heat, no performance. Just the request again. The mayor's smile faltered. He glanced at the crowd. Cameras were up now, phones raised halfway, careful, like people didn't want to admit they were filming history. A teenager near the aisle tilted his phone slightly higher. The screen's glow was a small, illicit light. My father noticed the phones. I saw it in the minute stiffness of his shoulders. He still believed he could control narrative, but narrative became harder to control when everyone held a recorder. The mayor finally nodded, too slow to look confident. "If it's public," he said, voice cautious, "we can allow a brief excerpt." Brief. He wanted it contained. My father's mouth tightened. He forced his smile back into place, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Fine," he said. 1 word. The microphone caught it. The room heard it. A reluctant consent. The reporter stepped to the clerk's table and placed the packet down gently, like setting evidence onto an altar. The paper made a soft thump against the wood. A small sound, final. The clerk blinked, then adjusted her glasses. Her hands were steady, trained, practiced, accustomed to handling other people's secrets without comment. She stood. The hall held a new kind of silence, anticipatory, alert. Even the air seemed to stop moving. I could smell the lemon wax again more sharply, like cleanliness turned anxious. My father stepped half an inch back from the podium, as if distance would make him less responsible for what was about to be read. His hands stayed on the wood, but his fingers curled slightly, gripping. The clerk carried the packet to the side microphone stand the staff had set up. The pages fluttered once as she walked, a faint papery hiss. She adjusted the mic height. The stand clinked. The sound echoed too loudly. Then she looked to the mayor, waiting for confirmation. The mayor nodded. And the clerk began, voice clear, neutral, unafraid of the room's feelings. "Municipal Action Review," she read. "Ruiz Property, Safety Determination." Each word landed like a stamp. My father stared straight ahead, face controlled. The metal ribbon on his chest rose and fell with his breathing. The clerk turned a page. The paper snapped softly under her fingers, the sound like a thin branch breaking. "Inspector's note," she read. "Repairs recommended. No imminent danger." A ripple moved through the first rows. Not noise, not outrage. Just motion. Shoulders shifting, heads turning, a few brows tightening. The story my father had told, emergency, salvation, now had a rival voice. My father leaned toward the podium mic as if to interrupt. The mayor lifted a hand slightly, a quiet command. Let her finish. My father froze. His throat moved, swallowing. The microphone amplified the small, wet sound. It was intimate in the worst way. The clerk continued, voice unchanged. Directive issued by city official Harold Bennett. Proceed immediately. She paused a fraction, eyes scanning the next line. Override objections. The hall did not gasp. It did something more serious. It absorbed. Because the words were not dramatic. They were administrative, and that was what made them cold. My father's fingers tightened on the podium edge. The wood creaked faintly. Only someone listening for stress cues would have heard it. I heard it. The clerk turned another page. The paper's movement sounded loud now because nothing else moved. Outcome, she read. Condemnation executed. Family displaced within 72 hours. A woman in the second row lifted a hand to her mouth without realizing it. She lowered it again when she noticed herself, as if embarrassed by her own reaction. My father's face stayed composed, but the muscles at the corner of his jaw worked like he was chewing something bitter. The clerk looked down again. Public statement drafted for briefing, she read. My heart slowed. Not from calm, from certainty. This was where he'd built the myth. The clerk read the line, steady as a metronome. We saved our neighbors from imminent collapse. Saved. There it was, but now it was on paper. And paper didn't glow with virtue. It only reflected what it contained. The clerk's eyes moved to the next line. She didn't change her tone, but the room changed around her. People leaned forward, as if proximity could alter the meaning. Internal review, she read, concludes. Statement inconsistent with inspector findings. A murmur tried to rise, tiny, uncertain, but it died quickly, strangled by the weight of what had just been made public. Mini-turn. Someone near the side aisle stood up halfway, then sat down again, as if their body didn't know what to do with the new reality. A phone's camera light clicked on in the front row, a small white dot that made the clerk's face look sharper. My father finally spoke, leaning into the podium microphone. This is being misrepresented, he said. 4 words. Defensive. Too late. The mayor looked at him like a man realizing he'd invited weather into the building. The reporter didn't smile. She didn't nod. She simply waited, because she knew the clerk wasn't done. The clerk cleared her throat once, quiet, human, and continued. There is an attachment, she read. Ethics office correspondence. My father's eyes flicked, fast, toward the clerk's hands. I felt my own pulse jump, a sharp thud under my ribs. The attachment. I knew it existed. I had written it. I had filed it. I had tried to bury it afterward because my father's silence had taught me fear. But I hadn't known the declassification would bring it into light, too. My fingers tightened around the edge of my seat. The fabric bit into my skin. The clerk looked down at the attachment page. The hall was so quiet I could hear the faint buzz of the overhead lights, a thin electric insect sound. Submitted memorandum, she read. The clerk's eyes moved to the author line. She paused, just a fraction, because names made things real. My father's hand lifted slightly as if to stop her, then lowered again. He didn't have the authority to silence a public record without looking guilty. I sat in the back row, unseen, unintroduced, my last name unspoken in the program except beneath his picture. And I understood the shape of the next moment before it arrived. Not because I could predict the clerk's voice, because I knew my father. He had built his image by controlling voices, by deciding who spoke, when, and about what. He had used my silence as proof of family honor. Now the microphone belonged to a clerk, and the clerk belonged to the record. The clerk inhaled, eyes fixed on the line she was about to read. My father stared at the paper like it was a living thing. I kept my posture still. I kept my mouth closed. I did not stand. Not yet. Because whatever name the clerk was about to speak, it would not need my volume to become true. The clerk's lips parted to read the author line, and the entire hall leaned into the sound of a name. The clerk's lips parted, and the name left her mouth like a stamp hitting paper. Submitted memorandum, she read, eyes steady behind her glasses. Author, Major Claire Bennett. My name did not echo the way applause did. It didn't swell and rebound off the walls. It landed, flat, factual. Then the entire civic hall seemed to forget how to breathe. For a moment, I heard only the overhead lights, a thin electric hum that suddenly felt louder than any human reaction. The stage lamp cast a narrow yellow pool over the packet, turning the pages into a small, illuminated truth. Somewhere near the middle rows, a coat sleeve brushed against fabric with a faint hiss. It sounded obscene in the stillness. My father's hands tightened on the podium. The wood creaked, quiet, involuntary, a sound like strain trying not to show itself. He turned his head slightly, eyes scanning the hall in a quick, controlled sweep, not searching for me as a daughter, searching for the threat as a variable. His gaze moved like a politician's, broad, practiced, impersonal. When his eyes reached the back rows, they slid over my face again. If he saw me, he didn't allow himself to register it. If he didn't see me, it was because he had never trained himself to look for the people he erased. The clerk continued, voice neutral, almost gentle. "I object to this action as unjustified," she read. The sentence was mine, written years ago in a tone I had forced into professionalism so no one could dismiss it as emotion. Hearing it aloud now, in this hall, through this microphone, I felt the strangest sensation. Not embarrassment, not pride, but a clean ache of recognition. My younger voice had survived. My silence hadn't killed it. It had only delayed it. The clerk turned a page. The paper snapped softly between her fingers, and the sound traveled through the room like a small crack in glass. "This decision displaces a family without cause," she read. A woman in the front row shifted, the pearl buttons on her sleeve catching the stage light. Someone else inhaled sharply, then stopped as if ashamed of making noise. The reporter stood motionless beside the clerk, hands folded, face unreadable. Not triumphant, not cruel. This wasn't a spectacle. It was an audit. My father leaned forward into his own microphone, trying to take back the air. "This is being twisted," he said. 3 words, tight, defensive. The speakers made his voice larger than it deserved to be, and the room heard the strain in it. He wasn't delivering a line anymore. He was reacting. The mayor lifted a hand half an inch, the smallest civic signal of containment. "Let the record finish," his gesture said. "Let procedure do what emotion can't." My father swallowed. The microphone amplified the wet, intimate sound. It was the kind of sound you never heard from him at a podium. Too human, too unpolished. The clerk did not look at him. She looked at the page. "Ethics office note," she read. "Acknowledgement of receipt." She paused at the date, then read it anyway. The date was an old winter day that I remembered by smell. Dish soap and cold air leaking through a cracked kitchen window. My mother humming as if normalcy were protection. Hearing it now, anchored in public ink, I felt my spine straighten inside my coat. The clerk continued. "Inspector's finding remained unchanged," she read. "No imminent danger." Another soft rustle moved through the crowd. Not outrage, something more sober. The recognition that the hero's story had been built on a word that didn't match the record. Saved. My father had said it with warmth. Paper said otherwise. He tried again, voice clipped now. "Enough," he said. One word. Too sharp. Too revealing. The room didn't flinch away from him. The room flinched away from the sound of control failing. The mayor's face tightened. The civic smile had disappeared. In its place was a man realizing he was standing next to a collapse he couldn't prevent without joining it. The clerk turned another page, careful, professional. The paper's dry whisper filled the hall because no one else dared to. "Conclusion," she read. "Public statement inconsistent with findings." That sentence hit differently than an accusation. It didn't call him evil, it called him inaccurate. For a man who had lived on image, inaccuracy was fatal. My father stood very still, as if movement might prove guilt. His medal ribbon looked suddenly childish, bright stripes pinned to a chest that no longer looked heroic under the lights. The flag pin on his lapel glinted, sharp and indifferent. I watched his face as if I were watching a negotiation partner in a hostile room. I looked for the micro-expressions: anger, panic, calculation. What I saw was something quieter. A man realizing that his favorite weapon, his voice, was no longer the loudest one in the room. The clerk stopped reading. She lowered the packet slightly. The lamp still burned over the pages, making them shine like a confession no one could fold back up. A silence spread across the hall so completely it felt physical, like pressure in the ears before a storm. This was the crowd's reaction, not announced, not instructed. Silence. No one stood, no one booed, no one clapped to rescue the moment. Not even sympathetic applause, the kind people offered to stop discomfort from growing teeth. They let it exist. My father leaned into his microphone again, and for the first time all night, he didn't sound like he was speaking to a community. He sounded like he was pleading with a room. "I served you," he said. 3 words, simple, almost childlike. He had served himself through them, I thought, but I didn't move my face. The truth didn't need my expression to become real. The older man, Ruiz's neighbor, sat with both hands on his knees, looking at the stage as if his eyes were tired of carrying history. The woman with the lavender tissue had stopped wiping her eyes. Her tissue sat crumpled in her fist, forgotten. The reporter's pen hovered over a notepad. She didn't rush to fill the silence. She let it do its work. My father's gaze darted again, searching for a lifeline. He looked toward the mayor, then toward the city council members seated on stage, then out toward the crowd. His eyes did not ask, "What did I do?" They asked, "Who will save me?" I felt something inside me settle into place. For years, I had lived as if my father's reputation was a shared organ. If it failed, we all bled. That belief had kept me quiet. It had kept me compliant. It had kept me carrying someone else's compromise like it was family property. But in this moment, under stage lights and in silence, I saw the lie underneath that belief. His reputation had never been shared. It had been borrowed. Borrowed from my restraint. Borrowed from the town's hunger for a clean story. Borrowed from the fact that the people harmed had been too tired, too polite, too invisible to be believed. Now the borrowing was being called in, not by me, but by ink. My father spoke again, voice tightening. "That was complicated," he said. 2 words that tried to turn displacement into nuance. The microphone made the hesitation audible. The room heard it. A man in the middle row lowered his program slowly, like he was seeing the stage for the first time. A teenager's phone camera stayed fixed, unwavering. The red recording dot glowed faintly. Another small, modern witness. The mayor cleared his throat, but the sound came out weak. He glanced at the clerk as if hoping she could give him instructions. The clerk simply stood there with the packet in her hands. Clerks didn't give instructions. They confirmed reality. My father's hand drifted to the medal on his chest, fingers brushing the ribbon as if to reassure himself it was still there. The gesture looked unconscious, almost intimate, like touching a wound through fabric. Then he said, too softly to be noble, "This is unfair," he said. 3 words, a complaint, not a defense. He had called his choices leadership for years. Now, facing consequence, he called it unfairness. The contradiction was almost tender in its desperation. The room remained silent, not cruel silence, a disciplined silence. Silence that refused to donate emotion to his rescue. I realized then what the true twist had been all along. No one had needed to expose him. He had exposed himself the moment he chose to build honor on a lie that required perpetual silence from the person who knew it was false. All the record had done was remove the lock. My father turned slightly, angling his body toward the mayor, as if to regain the structure of the event. "We should move on," he said. 4 words. Command disguised as decorum. The mayor didn't answer immediately. His eyes flicked to the reporter, then to the audience, then back to my father. He looked like a man standing on a stage that had become unstable under his shoes. Finally, the mayor spoke into his microphone, voice careful. "We will conclude the questions," he said. He wanted to end it, to fold the night back into something manageable. But you couldn't end a record by changing the schedule. The clerk set the packet down on the small table beside the microphone stand. Paper touched wood with a soft, final tap. My father stood at the podium with his hands gripping the edges, and for the first time in my life, he looked small in public. Not humiliated, exposed. There was a difference. Humiliation was a performance. Exposure was physics. A man couldn't argue with light. And that was when I stood. The scrape of my chair against the polished floor sounded too loud. It turned heads like a snapped branch in a quiet woods. The smell of lemon wax sharpened, as if the room's cleanliness had become nervous. I rose slowly, keeping my shoulders level, my breath controlled. Years of training had taught my body how to move when eyes were on it. I felt the weight of my bag at my side, the envelope inside like a pulse. A few people in the back rows looked at me with mild curiosity. Who was she? Then with dawning recognition when they noticed the posture, the stillness, the bearing that didn't belong to casual attendance. My father's gaze snapped toward the sound. This time, his eyes found me. For a second, there was no mayor, no reporter, no clerk, no crowd. There was only the narrow line of sight between a father and a daughter across a civic hall that smelled like polish and old lies. His expression shifted, confusion first, then a tightening that looked like fear trying to become anger and failing. He didn't speak my name. He didn't dare. Because speaking it would confirm what the record had already implied, that the daughter he had erased from his story had always existed, listening. I didn't walk forward. I didn't lift a finger toward the microphone. I didn't give the room a speech to clap for or condemn. I refused to make my pain into entertainment, even for justice. Instead, I lifted my right hand in a clean, precise motion and brought it to my brow. A military salute. The gesture cut through the hall with its own kind of sound, silent, sharp, unmistakable. A disciplined acknowledgement, not of him, but of the moment, of duty, of separation. I held it for one beat, then another. Long enough for the crowd to understand it wasn't applause, it wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't protest, it was boundary. My father stared at me as if I had struck him without touching him. I lowered my hand. Then I turned toward the exit. My heels clicked softly with each step. The sound was steady, controlled, like a metronome marking a decision. People shifted in their seats as I passed, making space without speaking. A man's knee bumped his chair leg with a dull tap. A woman's bracelet chimed faintly as she pulled her hand back to her lap. No one stopped me. No one called out. Silence held. At the door, I pressed the push bar. The metal felt cool against my palm. The hinges released with a soft, oiled sigh. Light from the lobby spilled in, cooler, whiter, less flattering than the stage lights. It smelled faintly of wet coats and winter air. I stepped through. Behind me, the civic hall remained quiet, as if the building itself had chosen restraint. The door closed softly. Not a slam, not a flourish. A gentle seal. And in that soft closing sound, I felt the end of a bargain I had never wanted. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Because the only thing left to say, if any line belonged to the night at all, was already true without my voice. He spoke of honor. Truth corrected him. Outside the hall, my phone began to ring in my bag. The vibration was insistent, familiar, and suddenly powerless. The morning after, the world didn't feel different. It sounded different. No applause, no microphone hum, just the thin hiss of a hotel radiator and the distant splash of tires on wet pavement outside my window. The room smelled like burnt coffee and detergent that tried too hard to be clean. My phone lay face up on the nightstand, silent for the first time in hours. I sat on the edge of the bed, fully dressed, coat still on, boots laced the way I always lace them, tight enough to move, not tight enough to cut off feeling. I had slept in fragments. Every time I drifted off, I heard the clerk's voice again. My name spoken like a fact. Major Claire Bennett. It wasn't the name that kept me awake. It was the weight lifting off my chest in a way my body didn't trust yet. The news alert came at 6:18 a.m. Harold Bennett announces resignation, following release of municipal records. No adjectives, no moral verdict, just the administrative version of consequence. I stared at the headline until the words stopped looking like words and became shape, ink, light, a record of a record. My coffee sat untouched on the desk, steam thinning into the stale air. I expected satisfaction to arrive like a wave. It didn't. What came instead was quiet. Clean, almost surgical. The same kind of quiet I'd felt in the hall when the crowd chose not to clap for him. Silence, again. Outside, a siren wailed briefly, then faded. The city kept moving. It always did. I opened the article. The reporter wrote what I already knew. Declassified documents contradicted a public narrative. A statement inconsistent with findings. A family displaced. A career built on virtue now kneeling to procedure. My father's quoted line in the article was short. "I'm stepping down," he'd said. 5 words. He still knew how to sound dignified while retreating. My phone buzzed once after I set it down. A call. Harold Bennett. My thumb hovered over the screen. For a moment, I was 22 again, standing in a yellow pool of desk lamp light, hearing a lock click, being told to carry something heavy because it was for family. Then I answered. "Claire," he said. His voice sounded smaller without amplification. No stage, no crowd, just the raw grain of a man in a room by himself. I could hear a clock ticking behind him, steady, domestic, indifferent. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't apologize. He went straight to what he needed. "Fix this," he said. 2 words, not a request, a reflex. I kept my voice level. "I didn't cause it." A pause. I heard him inhale sharply, then smooth it out. "They're calling me a liar," he said. I looked at my bag on the chair, the manila envelope inside it pressing against the leather like a heart. The smell of paper rose in my imagination. Dry, official, patient. "The record spoke," I said. His voice tightened. "You could have stopped it." I didn't argue. I didn't list his choices. I didn't raise my voice. "I stayed seated," I said. He exhaled through his nose, a familiar sound, the beginning of control. Then he softened his tone, the way he always did when command failed. "You're my daughter," he said. 3 words that used to pull me back into orbit. They didn't this time. "I was silent long enough," I said. 6 words. Calm. Final. He didn't respond right away. The ticking clock filled the space like a metronome measuring distance. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, edged with something like fear. "Say something," he said. "Help me." 2 short lines, both under 8 words. Both still asking me to do what I'd always done. Carry his weight so he could stand upright. I watched a bead of condensation slide down the outside of the coffee cup. It left a wet trail on the cheap desk, a small mark that proved time had passed. "No speech changes ink," I said. He went still on the other end of the line. I could hear him breathing. I could hear the tiny friction of a hand rubbing across fabric, like he was trying to wipe something invisible away. "You wanted this," he said. 3 words. An accusation meant to make me feel guilty for reality. "I wanted truth," I said. 2 words. The simplest distinction. His breath hitched. "You embarrassed me." I felt the old instinct to comfort him rise. Trained in me, rooted in childhood, a reflex like flinching. I let it pass through without obeying. "You did that," I said. 3 words. Not cruel, not loud, just accurate. He didn't shout, he didn't threaten. My father rarely needed volume. His power had always been proximity and implication. So he tried implication. "Your mother's hurting," he said. 4 words. A lever. I closed my eyes once. I pictured my mother's careful smile at church functions, the way she used napkins and small talk to cover cracks. I pictured her choosing quiet because quiet kept a roof over the story. "I'm sorry," I said. "I won't lie." 6 words. The closest thing to tenderness I could offer without surrender. Another pause. Then his voice went flat, cold as paperwork. "You owe me," he said. 3 words. I opened my eyes and stared at the hotel's beige wall. The paint had small scuffs near the light switch, as if other hands had reached there in other moments of stress. I answered, "I owe myself." 3 words back. The silence on the line stretched. He didn't hang up. He didn't apologize. He didn't soften again. Finally, he said, "We'll talk later." 3 words, trying to keep a door open. "We won't," I replied. 2 words. A closure. I ended the call with a steady thumb. No shaking, no theatrical breath, just an action completed. My phone stayed quiet after that, but my inbox did not. An email arrived from the city ethics office with a subject line that made my stomach tighten in a familiar way. Follow-up. Ruiz Property Review. Declassification Addendum. I opened it slowly. The text was formal, cautious, as if the institution itself feared emotion. They acknowledged my memo from years ago. They referenced newly public materials. They requested a brief statement from me, as the original submitter, to confirm authenticity and clarify any context. Context. My father's favorite word. But this time, context wasn't a fog. It was a record. I read the email twice, then placed the phone down carefully beside my coffee cup, aligning it with the edge of the desk like I was arranging evidence on a table. Mini-turn. I realized I had one more decision to make, not about my father, but about myself. Silence had ended in the hall, but it could begin again in a quieter room if I let it. I opened my laptop. The keys clicked under my fingers. Sharp, rhythmic, honest. I typed a statement that did not accuse, did not dramatize, did not perform pain. I kept it procedural, because procedure was what had finally held my father still. I confirmed the memorandum submitted under my name as authentic. I submitted it in good faith based on the inspector's finding. I have no further comment beyond the record. I read it once, checking for heat. There was none. Then I sent it. A simple click, a small act, a line drawn in ink, not voice. The day moved forward in quiet increments. I packed my things, folded clothes, checked my wallet, kept moving like I did between missions, minimal, deliberate, controlled. In the lobby, the smell of wet coats and floor cleaner hit me again. A bell rang softly as the front door opened. Cold air rushed in, biting my cheeks. Outside, the sky was a dull winter gray. Cars passed with a steady hiss on slick streets. Nobody looked at me twice. That anonymity felt like mercy. My phone buzzed again as I loaded my bag into the rental car. A text. We should meet. Then another. Just you and me. No name on the messages. Still him, of course. The same attempt at intimacy as leverage. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred slightly. I could almost smell his cologne in the memory of those words. Could almost feel the kitchen light buzzing above an old table. I typed a reply, then deleted it. Typed again, then deleted it. Finally, I wrote the only sentence that wouldn't reopen the bargain. I won't manage your consequences. 6 words. I sent it. The phone went quiet. I started the car. The engine's low rumble steadied me in a way applause never had. The heater kicked on with a dry breath that smelled faintly of dust warming up. As I drove out of town, I passed the Civic Hall. The building looked the same in daylight. Brick, steps, flags out front snapping lightly in the wind. No banner, no crowd. Just architecture. I thought about the podium microphone, how it had carried his myth for years, how it had carried the clerk's reading in one night, how it had amplified the sound of his swallow when his control failed. Voice was powerful, but paper was patient. And silence, true silence, was not obedience. It was sometimes the room finally refusing to participate. My father had built himself on my quiet. That foundation was gone now, not because I had shouted, but because I had stopped protecting the lie. The highway stretched ahead, gray and wet. The wipers tapped a steady rhythm, back and forth, like a slow salute to forward motion. By the time the city disappeared in my rearview mirror, I understood something I hadn't allowed myself to say before. His fall wasn't my revenge. It was my release. And the next time I stood in front of a room, it wouldn't be to defend a family name. It would be to teach what honor actually cost. My phone stayed face down in the cup holder, silent at last, while my hand stayed steady on the wheel. Base air always smelled honest to me. Diesel, cold metal, and the faint bite of disinfectant that didn't pretend to be anything else. The helicopter thumped somewhere beyond the motor pool, a low rhythmic pressure you felt in your ribs more than heard. It was the sound of machinery doing exactly what it was built to do. No speeches, no plaques, no applause. Just function. I walked across the lot with my coat collar turned up against the wind, my bag heavy at my side. The manila envelope inside it stayed flat and quiet, but I felt it anyway. The way you felt a folded flag, the way you felt a promise. In the admin building, the hallway lights hummed. My boots made soft impacts on tile. A young private passed me carrying a stack of folders, eyes wide with the wary respect new soldiers carried for officers. He shifted the folders higher on his arm, paper edges scraping. "Morning, ma'am," he said. "Morning," I answered. My voice sounded normal. That was the strange part. After a night that had rearranged my family's entire mythology, I still had meetings, still had training schedules, still had people who needed answers that weren't emotional. Life didn't stop for revelations. In my office, I set my bag down carefully and shut the door. The latch clicked, small, contained. The room smelled faintly of printer toner and stale coffee, and sunlight through the blinds drew pale stripes across my desk like quiet discipline. I pulled the envelope out. It looked ordinary. Manila, creased corners, a red stamp too blunt to be dramatic. Declassified. I placed it in the top drawer, not hidden, not displayed. Positioned. Like a reference, not a weapon. Then I sat down and opened my day's briefing materials. The paper rustled. My laptop fan kicked on with a soft whir. Outside my door, a radio crackled somewhere down the hall. I tried to focus on the mission, but the Civic Hall kept replaying in my body, not as fear, more like muscle memory. The way the room had gone quiet, the way my father's voice had thinned without his crowd to hold it up, the way the clerk had read my name as if it were just another line on a page. Major Claire Bennett. For years, my identity had been split. Soldier by choice, daughter by inheritance, silent accomplice by pressure. In the hall, those pieces had finally stopped pretending they belonged together. A knock sounded at my door. 2 quick taps. "Enter," I said. Sergeant Alvarez stepped in with a training roster tucked under his arm. His uniform smelled like outdoor air and laundry soap, the scent of someone who lived inside routine. "Ma'am," he said, "you good for the ethics block this afternoon?" I looked at the roster, then at the clock on my wall. The second hand moved with steady indifference. "Yes," I said. "We'll do it." He nodded. "Copy." Before he turned to leave, he hesitated, then added carefully, "Heard you were home this weekend." Word traveled fast on bases. Not gossip, not exactly. More like an awareness that officers were human too, that lives existed outside gates. "I was," I said. Sergeant Alvarez read my face, then decided not to ask for a story. He respected what silence could mean when it wasn't forced. "Roger," he said, and left. The door clicked closed again. Mini turn. I realized I had a choice I'd never allowed myself before. I could let the civic hall be a private wound I managed alone, or I could turn it into instruction, something that saved someone else from learning the hard way. That afternoon, I stood in front of a classroom of trainees who still smelled like new uniforms and uncertainty. The whiteboard behind me carried faint ghosts of old lessons, half-erased maps, doctrinal acronyms, reminders that words mattered. The room smelled like dry erase marker and coffee that had been left too long on a warmer. Outside the window, sunlight glanced off a parked Humvee, bright enough to sting. I placed a slim folder on the lectern. Not the original municipal packet, never that, but a redacted training case file I'd built from the declassified materials. The cover page was simple. Case study. Administrative truth versus public narrative. The trainees settled, chairs creaking. A few shifted notebooks into place. A pen clicked open, then stilled. I didn't begin with my father. I began with a principle. In conflict environments, I said, the fastest way to lose legitimacy is to confuse reputation for integrity. A few brows lifted. One soldier leaned forward slightly. I wrote 2 words on the board. The marker squeaked, sharp and honest. Loyalty, truth. The room went quiet in the good way, attentive, ready. Most of you, I said, were raised with some version of this. Stand by your people. A few nodded. Someone's boot tapped once against the floor, then stopped. That instinct isn't wrong, I continued, but it can be weaponized. I turned the folder over and opened it. Paper whispered against paper, the same dry sound that had filled the civic hall. This is a municipal action file, I said. A decision framed as saving the community. I paused, letting the word saving hang there, stripped of warmth. The inspector's finding, I continued, did not support the emergency claim. The public statement did. One trainee raised a hand, Private First Class Myers, young, eager, his haircut still too sharp. "Ma'am," he said, "so someone lied?" His question was plain, almost innocent. I recognized the need beneath it. A clean moral label, a villain in a story. I kept my tone level. Someone chose a narrative, I said, and asked others to carry it. Another hand rose. Corporal Singh, older, more cautious. "What do you do," he asked, "when it's your own chain pushing the narrative?" The room tightened subtly. That question was heavier. That question was real. I looked at Singh and felt the old kitchen light buzzing above a table. Felt the pressure of a father's voice saying, "For family." I didn't flinch. "You document," I said. "You use channels, and you keep your statements factual." Myers frowned. "But what if it blows up?" he asked. He meant, what if it ruins someone? What if it ruins you? I closed the folder gently. The paper edges aligned with a soft tap. "Truth doesn't blow things up," I said. "Pressure does." A few faces changed, thought settling in. Singh asked quietly, "And loyalty?" I turned back to the board. The word loyalty sat there like something people wanted to worship. "Loyalty isn't lying," I said. My voice stayed calm because calm was the only tone that could carry this without becoming performance. "Loyalty," I continued, "is refusing to assist a mistake." I underlined truth once, slow and deliberate. The marker squeaked again, and the sound made the sentence feel more permanent. Mini turn. In the front row, a young specialist lowered his eyes as if he'd been handed a memory he hadn't processed yet. He didn't speak, but his shoulders eased slightly, like someone had finally given him permission to name something. The lesson continued for an hour. We talked about legitimacy. We talked about documentation. We talked about how institutions, military, municipal, familial, often preferred quiet because quiet was easy to manage. No one asked for my personal example, and I didn't offer it. My story wasn't the point. The principle was. After class, as the trainees filed out, the room emptied into the soft sounds of chair legs scraping and papers being stuffed into pockets. One by one, they left. Corporal Singh lingered at the door. "Ma'am," he said, voice low. "Thanks." "For what?" I asked. He hesitated, then chose his words carefully. "For saying it clean." I nodded once. A small acknowledgement, not a bond. "Take care of your people," I told him, "but don't carry their lies." He nodded, then left. When the room was empty, I stood alone in the hush. The sunlight had shifted, turning the stripes from the blinds into longer bars across the floor. I returned to my office and opened the top drawer. The manila envelope sat there, flat and quiet. I stared at it for a long moment, not with hatred, with clarity. I thought about my father calling and saying, "Fix this," about his instinct to treat me like a tool, about the civic hall's silence, the first time the town had refused to cushion him with comfort. I thought about my mother, too, somewhere in that town, trying to breathe inside the wreckage of a reputation she had helped maintain. I didn't hate her. I understood her. That was part of what hurt. And I understood something else, finally, without bargaining with myself. The boundary I'd drawn wasn't cruelty. It was adulthood. I slid the envelope farther back in the drawer, not hiding it, just placing it where it belonged. Part of my history, not my identity. Then I shut the drawer. The metal rails clicked softly as it closed. A clean end. My phone buzzed once on the desk, an unknown number. I didn't pick it up. If it was him, he could learn what it felt like to live without my silence as scaffolding. If it was someone else, they could leave a message like everyone else had to. I looked at the wall where I kept a small framed oath, words I'd taken seriously because they didn't ask me to lie for anyone. I breathed in. The office smelled like toner and dust warmed by late afternoon sun. The helicopter thump outside had faded, replaced by the distant call of cadence from a formation somewhere on the field. I sat down and began planning tomorrow's training. Quiet work, dignified work. Work that didn't require a stage. And when I caught myself thinking of my father's face under the lights, his mouth opening, then closing, I didn't feel triumph. I felt the plain truth of a lesson that would outlive his reputation and my resentment. Silence ends.